Some really sad news to bring you this evening. It's breaking at the time of recording this video, and that is that WWE Hall of Famer, pro wrestling icon, pro wrestling legend, one of, if not the greatest pro wrestler of all time, and it's not hyperbole, he absolutely is in that category. Terry Funk, the hardcore legend, the hardcore icon, pro wrestling's just, again, one of the greatest of all time, has sadly passed away at the age of 79 years old. It was announced by Mick Foley first on social media, later confirmed by Ric Flair. We can get the post up on the screen right now. You can see him. Mick Foley, as I mentioned, broke the news on his Facebook page. He writes, quote, "R.I.P. Terry Funk. I'm struggling to process this, but Terry Funk is gone. I just talked to Terry's daughter, Brandy, who gave me the awful news. He was my mentor, my idol, and one of my closest friends. He was the greatest wrestler I ever saw. If you get the chance, look up a Terry Funk match or a Terry Funk promo and give thanks to that this incredible man gave so much for so long to so many. There will never be another like him. May God bless Terry, his friends, family, and all who loved him. R.I.P. my dear friend. It was an honor to know you. R.I.P. Terry Funk." He also said that he's going to be writing more about Terry Funk in the coming days, as I'm sure everyone will. Obviously, there's so much support and tributes pouring in already to Terry Funk and his family, and we will be doing a full tribute video here, sort of compiling them in one place. So we'll absolutely be doing that. Obviously, this is just kind of the news is just breaking, as I mentioned at the time of recording this video now. Ric Flair also took to X to confirm the news as well. He said, quote, "In my entire life, I've never met a guy who worked harder. Terry Funk was a great wrestler, entertainer, unbelievably fearless, and a great friend. Rest in peace, my friend Terry Funk, knowing that no one will ever replace you in the world of professional wrestling." And he's right. He's absolutely right in that aspect, is Ric Flair. WWE posted the following on their website. They said, quote, "WWE is saddened to learn that WWE Hall of Famer Terry Funk has passed away at the age of 79. Revered by fans and peers across the globe for his tenacity, heart, and longevity, Funk will be remembered as one of the toughest competitors to ever step inside the squared circle. From WWE to All Japan, from WCW to ECW, Funk proved he could go toe-to-toe with the best and push the limits of what was possible inside the squared circle. The son of Dory Funk Sr., Terry began wrestling in the 1960s, forming a successful tag team with his brother and fellow WWE Hall of Famer Dory Funk Jr. before breaking out as a single star. In December 1975, Funk broke through when he defeated Jack Briscoe to capture the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in Miami. Funk first competed for WWE in 1985 during the height of the rock and wrestling era alongside his brother. The Funks appeared on the grandest stage of them all at WrestleMania 2, defeating the team of Tito Santana and the Junkyard Dog. His next stop was WCW in 1989, where he engaged in a legendary rivalry with Nature Boy Ric Flair, which culminated in an I Quit match that is still regarded as an all-time classic to this day. Funk had an impact around the world during his career, particularly in Japan, where he became one of the most beloved legends of the All Japan Pro Wrestling promotion alongside his brother Dory. Later, he was an innovator of the hardcore wrestling style alongside WWE Hall of Famer Mick Foley. The two brought the infamous style to a worldwide audience throughout a 1995 tournament where they battled in the finals, brawling through tables, chairs, barbed wire, and more. Funk was also an instrumental figure in the growth of Extreme Championship Wrestling. Although he was in his 50s at the time, Funk proved himself against the younger hardcore competitors of the Renegade promotion. When ECW presented its first pay-per-view Barely Legal in April 1997, it was Funk who headlined the show, defeating Raven to win the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. Funk returned to WWE in 1998 as Chainsaw Charlie, the deranged partner of Cactus Jack, and played a key role in the iconic Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Mankind. At nearly 60 years of age, in his return to WCW in 2000, Funk was far from finished in the title picture, capturing the United States Championship and the WCW Hardcore title. The last match of Funk's WWE career came at ECW One Night Stand in 2006, where he teamed with Tommy Dreamer and Beulah McGillicuddy against Mick Foley, Edge, and Lita. Funk left his imprints on Hollywood as well, with a number of appearances on the big screen, including roles in Roadhouse, Paradise Alley, and Over the Top. In recognition of nearly 50 years in sports entertainment, Terry was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame alongside his brother in 2009 by the late American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. WWE extends its condolences to Funk's family, friends, and fans. As I mentioned, Terry Funk, to me, when you're having the conversation about who is the greatest wrestler of all time. It's never anything that's going to be finalized or anything like that. But people, I think if you really know, and if you've done your research, Terry Funk's in that category. Terry Funk could and did everything in professional wrestling. Unfortunately, I think many people knew that this day was going to come. Terry Funk had been dealing with a lot of health issues over the past several years. At one point was in an assisted living facility. He's been suffering from dementia over the past few years. It had been reported that he was dealing with Parkinson's as well. He started his career, Terry Funk, back in the mid-60s, 1965 to be specific, and wrestled for pretty much every promotion you can possibly think of around the world throughout his long and illustrious career that featured several retirements and coming back out of retirements, but those promotions, of course, included WWE. He's a WWE Hall of Famer, WCW, Jim Crockett Promotions, All Japan Pro Wrestling, the National Wrestling Alliance, ECW, and what was so incredible about Terry Funk is he's remembered by a variety of different generations for different things. As I mentioned, if you're a fan of pro wrestling in the 60s and 70s, you remember Terry Funk as the NWA World Heavyweight Champion from 1975, holding the championship for 14 months and traveling around as the traveling champion to all of the territories and facing off against the territories' biggest stars and doing 1 hour Broadways or retaining the title and moving on to the next one. Again, if you're from Florida and you're a fan of the Florida territory in the 1970s, you remember him from being in championship wrestling from Florida. But also, if you then was really into the strong style Japanese style of wrestling, like All Japan Pro Wrestling and things like that, you'll know as Terry Funk as one of the toughest professional wrestlers that ever laced up a pair of boots. Whether it's just doing traditional Japanese strong style, stiff stuff, believable stuff, or whether it's going so far to do death matches in Japan for All Japan or for FMW or whatever it was, Terry Funk did it. He was having those King of the Death matches with Cactus Jack, with Mick Foley over there, and having him against whoever, whoever you could think of. He had that, and people. People like that because again, everyone's got a different style. Everyone's got a different style of that, and again, I think it's a testament just to the how incredible Terry Funk was. And then people might remember him from just WCW, from the late 80s into the early 90s, coming there to feud with Ric Flair or Sting or whoever he faced off against, and then being forced to retire and all that kind of stuff, or going back to Japan, like I said. And then some people who didn't know Terry Funk that well because of age, or they just got into pro wrestling during the real big boom of the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars of the late 90s, and they just know Terry Funk as being in ECW. And I don't mean just Extreme Championship Wrestling, I mean Eastern Championship Wrestling as well. And so many people talk about the ECW originals and the people that helped put ECW on the map, or they talk about the founders and the promoters or the bookers, whether it be Todd Gordon or Paul Heyman, and they talk about the Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, Rob Van Dam, Shane Douglas, all of these people, Taz. But realistically, had it not been for Terry Funk, there's a real possibility that they just wouldn't be considered a legitimate third promotion in the 90s. Terry Funk legitimized ECW. Terry Funk looked at some of those talents that were in ECW at the time, like the Sandman, like Tommy Dreamer. He was already working with Foley in Japan and stuff like that, but working with Foley in ECW too, or Sabu, particularly the likes of Sabu doing again no rope barbed wire matches, and said, oh my god. And because again, he was a former NWA World Heavyweight Champion from 20 years prior. He was legit, and he wrestled so many different styles too. He was wrestling the traditional Southern pro wrestling style in the 60s, in the 70s, and he was damn good at doing that too. Let's make no mistake here. Sometimes people think of Terry Funk middle-aged and crazy and just think of the more hardcore stuff he would do in ECW or WWE later on in his career, but he was a fundamental top tier pro wrestler, again in the Southern States, and being the NWA World Heavyweight Champion as well. He was just that good, and he was able to transition as well. And he obviously, his brother Dory Funk Jr. too, he's part of a pro wrestling dynasty in that aspect too, from Amarillo, Texas. That was, again, that's Terry Funk, that's the Funk family, that's just, again, they're NWA royalty. They truly are. but then he was able to adapt and he was able to do it all. And able to, as I mentioned, to work with those people in ECW, and then people like myself who sort of maybe came along a bit later in the 90s because I'm a bit younger, really was introduced as Terry Funk as Chainsaw Charlie, ironically enough, in WWE, where he's the partner to Cactus Jack in the feud with the New Age Outlaws, and he comes out with the stocking over his face, even though he had the Terry Funk t-shirt on. He's got a chainsaw, and it led to one of my favorite matches at that year's WrestleMania 14, which was the dumpster match, which was Chainsaw Charlie and Cactus Jack versus the New Age Outlaws, which they won and became the World Tag Team Champions. Not for long, obviously, but they became the Tag Team Champions. And then he left once again, and he went to ECW once again. Then he retired again and went to WCW. Briefly was the commissioner for a period of time there and tried to get their hardcore division going, and even then he returned to WWE back in 2006 at ECW One Night Stand, the follow-up to the original one, where he teamed up with Tommy Dreamer, faced off against Edge and Mick Foley. And even by that point, you could tell it was difficult for him. He was having health issues and physical issues, I mean, in the late 90s, in the 80s. So the fact that he was wrestling in 2006, but even then he took a bump for a bit of plywood with barbed wire on it that was set on fire, him and Foley did. And this, when it gets into the promos, because I think that's the thing that I love the most of Terry Funk, and people can love, as I mentioned, all these different aspects and chapters of his career, because it's a storied one. It's kind of unparalleled, the length he was able to go on for, and again, the retirement thing became a bit of a joke eventually, but all of the different styles he worked for me, it was the promos. For me, Terry Funk is, again, as I mentioned, in that category of one of the top greatest pro wrestlers ever. He's just genuinely in that conversation. But it was his promos. It's the Terry Funk voice. Everyone does a Terry Funk impression. Everyone does that, and I can't do it, but everyone does that voice of how he talks and his mannerisms and the way he delivers his words. And I think even in 2006, when he's in the ring with Foley, doing the build-up to One Night Stand 2006, he's getting in Foley's face and he's slapping him and he's calling his wife and his daughters derogatory names and all this kind of stuff. But that's a Terry Funk promo. He was a unique one of one. And it's just it's so sad to lose someone like that, because you say pro wrestling, you think Terry Funk. That's what you do. Now, as I mentioned, it wasn't unfortunately too much of a surprise, because he had been dealing with health issues for a really, really, really long time. As mentioned, just physical issues. He had, I think hip replacements. He needed knee replacements. He was part of the Beyond the Mat documentary, and that was in the late 90s. And he said he needed a knee replacement then. He did have the operation, but he needed so much more, and he still wrestled even when he had all of these problems too. He, as I mentioned, in more recent years, it had become known that he was having a lot more serious health issues. I think it was reported, as early as 2021, maybe June 2021, that he had been diagnosed with living with dementia. He was living in an assisted living facility. It was then, I think Ric Flair had said that he had returned home. He was doing well, so I don't know what the latest was with that. As I mentioned, I think there had been some reports that he was dealing with other health issues too, as well. And it's an incredible shame. And he will be celebrated, as I mentioned, as just one of the greatest pro wrestlers ever. I can go through his accomplishments, but I don't want to keep you too long. I could talk about Terry Funk for hours, honestly. Whether it be in championship wrestling as from Florida, being the NWA Florida heavyweight champion, ECW, as I mentioned, really for me putting that company on the map. That's why he's got a banner in the ECW arena, being a two-time ECW World Heavyweight Champion, being a ECW Television Champion, Georgia Championship Wrestling as well, again in WCW, NWA Crockett territory, being with his brother Dory Funk Jr. as well, in Jim Crockett Promotions too, being the US champion. As I mentioned, he was a hardcore champion, but that was right towards the death of WCW really. But the NWA, being that traveling NWA World Heavyweight Champion in the 70s, being an NWA Hall of Famer too. As mentioned, any territory you can think of, he was in it, and anything he did was just incredible. Whether him being really the best wrestler maybe on the planet in sort of, as I mentioned, from 1975, 1976 when he was the World Heavyweight Champion in the NWA, or having what some deemed as the feud of the year in 1989 against Ric Flair in WCW during that time period, and eventually it was a retirement match it led up to, one of his several, or working in WWE with Cactus Jack, or doing whatever. He just was the perfect pro wrestler. The promos, the ability to wrestle any kind of match, technical style, strong style, death match, comedy match, you name it, he could just do it all. And he also appeared in several films as well, realistically. You know, he was in Paradise Alley. He was in Roadhouse, probably most famously as well. He was in Time Stalkers. He had that in there as well. Over the Top, which was a Sylvester Stallone film. So in the sort of 70s and 80s, he did appear in a couple of films as well. Which, again, is just... that's just... incredible. Or whether it's, you know, as I mentioned, in FMW with Onita, Terry Funk for me is just one of the greatest, and he's going to be incredibly missed and incredibly sad. And tributes, as I mentioned, will continue to pour in. We'll do a full tribute video, and it's time to reflect. It's time to reflect on just one of the greatest ever. So Terry Funk, rest in peace. You'll be sorely missed.